All right, let's go ahead and get started this morning. Thank y'all so much for coming. This is week 4, working through the book of Job. If we have been walking on our journey so far, we're going to start jogging a little bit today as we kind of get a little bit more content under our belts, looking to really sink our teeth into that first dialogue cycle. So let's go ahead and pray this morning. Great God of heaven, thank you so much for your goodness and your grace. Thank you for a wonderful chance to be able to study deeply, a little more deeply than we normally get a chance to, this difficult book. Lord, we pray that you help us to ask the right questions, and that as we struggle for our answers, that you shape our hearts and our minds to know you and to love you and to learn more about you and your world. Thank you for each one of the people here today. We pray that you would help us to have a useful and productive time this morning. Amen. Amen. All right, let's go ahead and get started. I have a couple of handouts if anybody needs one. Does anybody need a handout? Give one here for Paul. Okay, one right over here. It's a little subtle hands. There we go, perfect. All right, last one, and so it's really expensive if you want the last one. Double for you. Okay. All right, so we're looking at the book of Job, and I always like to start with the review. As a reminder, the classes are available online, heartlandfree.com/Sunday School. They go up on Wednesday of each week. So if you do miss a week, you can always catch up online if you want. And if you miss a week and you don't want to catch up online, please come back. The book of Job is a book that is complex enough that you can miss a week or two and you're going to be just as confused as the rest of us. So, and we always like to start off with a little bit of a review. And so you can see the review questions on your handout as well. These are kinds of things that I think are very helpful as we continue going through this book, the big pieces that help us put it together. So the first one, these questions are intended for you to discuss in a group with those who are next to you there. So what kind of person is Job? What from chapters 1 through 2 are your clues? I ask this a lot because it's an important one. And we're going to see this come up more, maybe a little bit this week, but definitely next week. This question will kind of cause us some tension. And so this is a good question for us to ask. And then in your group, go ahead and ask this question. In Job, why does Job 2:10 say, in all this, Job did not sin in what he said? Notice I put it in italics. And this is what we talked about last week. Does this mean that Job sinned in his heart? He didn't sin in what he said, but he sinned in his heart. Is that what we're talking about here? Why or why not? What does Job curse in Job 3:1? What does this mean? And then what is Job's point in Job 3? So all of this is kind of reviewing some of the things from the past weeks, definitely the last couple questions there from last week. So take a couple of minutes and just think through together. And what are some of your stabs at some of these answers? So we'll take maybe, 3 or 4 minutes here for you to review together. All right. So you probably didn't get a chance to go through all of them, but we'll go through all of them here together. So this is the easy one, right? What kind of person is Job? And what is your clue? How do you know from chapters 1 to 2 what kind of person Job is? What in the Bible tells you the answer? Yes, Karen. It says it in both chapters. So the narrator says it at the very beginning, and then who says it in both chapters? God. So we have it repeated really 3 different times. The narrator says it, and then it's like, then God says it, and then it's like, no, seriously, really, really seriously, God says it again. So we know that Job is righteous because it uses that language, and God himself affirms it. Sometimes human characters in the Bible don't always tell us what's true. We'll definitely see this in the book of Job. But when the narrator says something, we know that it's true. And then when God says something in the Bible, we know that it's true. When narrator and God say something, we know that it's true. And when God says it twice, it's really there for us to pick up on. So in Job 2:10, we talked about last week, Job did not sin in what he said. Does this mean, is the author trying to tell us something else? Like Job didn't sin in what he said, but he sinned some other way. What is the author trying to do with Job 2:10? See, this is why we review. Isn't it lovely? Yes. That's right. That's right. Okay, so that's exactly right. What I said last week is that speech is the thing that the author is drawing our attention to, right? Like throughout chapter 1 and 2, the focus is on Job and his mouth. Is Job going to say the right kinds of things or the wrong kinds of things? So by Job 2:10, by drawing attention to the fact that Job did not sin in what he said, it's continuing to remind us that speech is the thing that's in focus here. Does anybody want to push back on that? Is anybody like, I don't know, that's a little trick. I don't buy that. I think what this does for us as a reader is it does draw our attention, because one of the things we looked at was comparing and contrasting similarities. So in Job chapter 1, it says, in all this, Job did not sin, or Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. Right? And so then chapter 2, it says, in all this, Job did not sin in what he said. So that's a similarity. So as Bible readers, when we see similar things, we're supposed to compare them and see how they're the same and how they're different. And when we look at the difference, as it being revolving around speech, it draws our attention to speech. And it asks us, how is speech functioning? Speech is going to be the only thing that drives the book for the next 40 chapters. 40. The author is telling us that speech matters. Okay, good. And so then what does Job curse in Job 3:1? And what does this mean? What does it mean what does Job curse? Yep. Yeah, Job curses the day that he was born. So what does that mean? Job 3:1, it says, Job opened his mouth and he cursed. I think it says he cursed his day, right? Maybe the NIV says cursed the day he was born. NIV sometimes adds some extra words. That's all right. They get the idea. Let's see what it says here. Job, the day. It says it cursed the day. The day of his birth. Yeah, curse the day of his birth. Okay. So what does that mean to curse the day of his birth? What is that? That's not that's not a normal thing that you curse. That's right. I wish that I hadn't been born. Job says, my life would have been better to have never have lived at all. This is really strong language from Job, right? I mean, this is not, if someone got up at church for prayer and then uttered these words to God, right? We'd be like, ooh, we may need to worry about this person, right? These are not normal church words. These aren't the normal kinds of, if you're gathering around your dinner table and you're like, all right, let's each of us pray. And someone prays this prayer, and God, I curse the day that I was born. I'm really sad that I was ever conceived and that I ever nursed. You're like, oh, okay, that's not what I was thinking about for pot roast, but it's speech to God. So Job is talking to God, and it's really important for us to recognize the level of despair, but the author is intentional in the way that he talks about it, right? Because he says, Job cursed. Now, for those of us who are reading it, right, we may get a little scared at that, because that's the whole wager. Is Job going to curse God? But the narrator, the author, tells us, no, Job does not curse God. He curses the day of his birth. He calls plagues and all kinds of things, darkness onto that day. But he does not curse God. So the author is very clearly trying to tell us, whatever you're going to think about Job 42:6, with Job at the end repenting of something, that uses that language of repenting. We looked at that last week. And it says, I repent in dust and ashes. We're going to have to make sense of that one day. I'm just going to keep kicking that ball down the road. But we do have to make sense of it one day. But whatever we're going to do to make sense of that, Job 3 is not a problem. Right? The author is telling us, Job, maybe one day he's going to say something bad that he needs to repent of, but Job 3 is not it, because he doesn't curse God, he curses the day of his birth, and he wishes that he had never been born. So this is not on here, so this is kind of the pop quiz. Who is Job talking to in Job chapter 3? Yeah, it seems, it's not immediately clear, right? He doesn't say, oh God, I wish that you would curse the day. But it does seem like Job is simply crying out mostly to God as his audience. This is going to be a question we'll ask throughout the rest of these chapters. So who is being talked to and who is doing the talking? Because we've got to remember, the friends show up at the end of chapter 2, and they're doing what friends are supposed to do. They're mourning, they've got the ashes, they're sackcloth, they're weeping, and they're sitting with him in silence. And then all of a sudden, Job cries out. His heart just cries out. And I would say it this way. God is certainly part of the audience for Job chapter 3. It may be that Job is crying out to the friends and God. He's just kind of crying out to whoever is there. But clearly, he's wanting God to hear these words. So, this is an easy one. What's it called when we talk to God? Prayer. Job is praying, at least in some sense, to God, even if he's also, maybe he is intending for the friends to hear, maybe he doesn't really care if the friends are there or not. But he lets out these terrible cries. So what is Job's point in Job 3? So we talked about that. He's cursing the day of his birth. We'll skip that one because I want to jump into the next question. So this is where we ended last week. So I asked the question, why do the friends get angry? From chapter 4 all the way up through chapter 27, the friends take turns criticizing Job, right? At least criticizing. That's probably the nicest term for it. Sometimes they do a little bit more than that. But they definitely criticize him, at least, from chapter 4 all the way through chapter 27. So Job is suffering, his wife comes, he responds to his wife. They don't say anything. They don't say anything for 7 days. Job opens his mouth in chapter 3, and something in there starts this conversation ball rolling. And the friends go, okay, we haven't said anything for 7 days, but now I have to start speaking. Elifaz says, now I have to respond. So what is it? What could it be? What do you think? Any stabs, any ideas? What is it in chapter 3 where the friends go, that you think the friends could say, this Job, I think, you may be in error here. There may be some sort of mistake that needs to be corrected. Yeah, so they do think that he must have some sin, that he may have some sin in order to bring it upon himself. It's interesting, that comes a little bit in chapter 4, but that would have been true for the 7 days of silence, too. Like if that's, there's something about chapter 3 that they're like, okay, now I can finally let him know what I really think. DJ? Yeah, so Elifaz, we'll look at Elifaz a little bit. He'll talk about the fact that he'll have some kinds of nice things to say about Job, and Elifaz, to DJ's point, says, why don't you take your own advice? So Job seems to have run aground of some advice that he has given. If Job is simply saying, I wish I hadn't been born, that's always seemed a little weird that the friends really latched onto that and are like, nah, now I'm going to get you. Because it's like, that's not really that controversial of a claim. It's not theologically a weird claim. So it is tricky for us to think through what is it that he could have said. So I included some verses on our handout here, 3, 13, and 14, and then 17 through 19. And it seems that the ideas that allow Job to say this cause the friends to be angry. Bev, you had a question? Elefaz. Yeah, so the innocent don't suffer. Yeah, so he does kind of say that. Yeah, so we'll get to that one. Good. So Job says, for now I would be lying down in peace if I had died. I'd be asleep and at rest with kings and rulers of the earth who built for themselves places now lying in ruins. Now, Bible poetry's hard. It's tricky. Sometimes you got to just reread it and go, what's the key idea here? Right? Job is saying, if I had died, if I had just been born and just been stillborn, there'd be no difference between me and the greatest kings who have ever lived. We both would just be at rest, right? We both would just be at rest. This is the beginning. This is where we realize that Job does not have a developed understanding of an afterlife. This should not surprise us because God always is gradually, progressively revealing new revelation to his people throughout time. So just because Job is unaware of an afterlife shouldn't cause us problems, right? God doesn't reveal everything all at one time. But Job is saying, kings, they die, they go into the ground. If I had died, I'd have gone into the ground. Same. That would have been better, right? At least then I'd have some peace. I wouldn't be in trouble and in torment. And then verse 17, this is where I really think the friends kind of picked up on it. He says, there, death, right? Just great poetry, because he never actually says where there is. He just means death. There, the wicked cease from turmoil, and there, the weary are at rest. Captives enjoy their ease. They no longer hear the slave driver shout. The small and the great are there, and the slaves are freed from their owners. I think, so what Job is clearly saying is that in death, there doesn't seem to be much difference between the wicked and everyone else. In death, there, the wicked are at rest. There, the kings are at rest. There, the slaves are free. There, the slave masters are just laying in the ground. And I think this ruffled the friends' feathers, because it sounds like what Job is saying is, this life doesn't really matter, because at the end, it's all just the same. And I think that idea is really what's causing the friends some trouble. And they're going to pick up on it and say, no, things do matter. How we live matters. The reason that you're suffering is not because of your innocence. There's some other cause that we'll have to, fortunately the friends help us tell us what exactly it is that Job has done.
Do you feel like God didn't reveal there's an afterlife to all those before Job?
Right. Yep.
How did you come to that?
Yeah, so the question is, does that mean that God had not revealed that there was an afterlife to those who were before Job? And I would say yes, that is what that means. And it's when we look at the Old Testament, it's only toward the end of the Old Testament that we start getting whispers of afterlife, of meaningful afterlife, conscious afterlife kind of stuff. So we get the image in Ezekiel where dead bones are resurrected. And in Daniel, one of the later books in the Old Testament, we do get this idea of resurrection, that God is able to resurrect us. And that's really the clearest moment in the Old Testament for a clear thoughts of the afterlife. Even a lot of it, the idea is the afterlife is a shadowy area, right? Even in the Psalms, we do get some information about what life looks like after the death or what they think would happen after death. But it's not this like grand celebration in the presence of God. It's like more often it's just a shadowy kind of existence. And we'll see Job's response in Job 5 or 6 is, God, you really shouldn't kill me because dead men don't do you any good. I can't praise you if I'm dead. Well, we know that's exactly what we do when we die, is that we praise the Lord. But so it's showing that Job does not have this developed sense of what's happening in the afterlife, in the same way that they didn't understand things about the Messiah. They didn't understand things about the kingdom of God. There's lots of things that are only progressively revealed later. Yeah, Paul? Yeah. Good. So the question is, what motivated people back then? See, and what I would want to say is almost something like this. I hope it's the same thing that motivates us, right? That are we motivated more by the goodies that God will give us after we die, or are we motivated to glorify and worship God because he's worthy? And Job helps us ask that question in a really much more powerful way because he doesn't have the notion of the afterlife, right? Like the question is, all right, Job, when all the chips are down, when your life is looking rough and you don't even believe in the afterlife, are you still going to worship God and hold to your integrity? Like, that's a much more powerful question that that we can explore, that the Bible allows us to learn from on the other side of the cross, right? Like if Job had been written after Jesus, the resurrection would have really been a key part of the answer, and it would have been like, well, even if you're 80, 90, 120 years are terrible, what's that compared to eternity? But then that does kind of get into that reward mindset, right? Like, is the only reason we're doing it for the rewards of heaven? Or is there something about worshiping God because he's worthy, not just because, I get a mansion and streets of gold and those sorts of things? Yeah, okay. All right. Let's move along here. So Job again, Job's troubles. What is Job saying? We already got all that. Who's Job talking to? We talked about that. Okay, good. What's the most offensive thing that Job says here? Oh yeah, we talked about that. Okay, what does he say that could make the friends angry? And so again, the key thing to note is that Job really doesn't say anything that we would be looking and putting like a false next to, right? Like Job said this, but that's false. Job really hasn't said anything false. And then we get to the friends. So we get to these dialogue cycles, and this is the part of the book where eyes start to glaze over, where minds start to wander, where our imaginations get dull, because we're not used to thinking through the dialogue cycles. We're all familiar with Job's story. It's a great story. A righteous, wealthy man who loses everything and is faced with the biggest question of his life. So are you still going to worship God? That's good. Man, that's good. But I think Job 4 through 27, this is the reason that this doesn't become a Hollywood movie, right? Because 80% of the book is talking, right? And it's just talking and talking. So we get these, what we call these dialogue cycles. So you have these three friends, Elifaz, Bildad, and Zophar, and they all take turns talking to Job. And we have 3 cycles. But in between each friend talking to Job, Job kind of butts in and gets a little bit of a response. He actually talks more than the friends do most of the time. So Elifaz will talk, Job will talk. Bildad will talk, Job will talk. Zophar will talk, Job will talk, right? So it goes friend, Job, friend, Job, friend, Job. And you've got these cycles that repeat. But again, this is just a little teaser. They don't perfectly repeat, because then we get to the third cycle, right? This is exactly like the knock-knock joke. Knock, knock, who's there? Banana. Knock, knock, who's there? Banana. Knock, knock, who's there? Orange. Orange who? Aren't you glad I didn't say banana again? Right? It's like the 2+1 pattern. We see this all over the place in literature, in fables, right? Like you think about the 3 little pigs, right? How many pigs are there? There's 3. You have something that the first pig gets eaten, the second pig gets eaten, the third pig gets saved. Knock, knock, who's there? Banana, banana, orange. Banana, same, orange, different. Then you get to the Job cycle. You have cycle 1. Cycle 2 is the exact same. Cycle 3 is almost the same, but it's different. And in those differences, we see some really cool things, because in the third cycle, Zophar doesn't get a chance to talk. Bildad's speech gets interrupted, and he actually winds up talking twice. So we have to make sense of this chaos in the third cycle, but that's a different day. That's just, see, there's fun things here. There's fun things in the dialogue cycles. So we're going to start looking at what these friends are saying. We're not going to be able to go verse by verse. You wouldn't want to go verse by verse, but we're going to try and get some big ideas here. What are the friends doing? So is chapter 3 a dialogue? No, right? Chapter 3 is Job talking to God. So this is now the question for us. What is Eliphaz's tone throughout? So there's a couple of verses I think I included on your handout. Good. Some of them. No, don't look at those verses. That's the next question. So instead, look at these verses up on the screen, and that's the question. What is Eliphaz's tone? If you're reading this for the first time, remember, you're already thinking our assumption is that these are good friends, because they've been good friends so far in chapter 1 and chapter 2. So when we're reading Elifaz, our first assumption is this is a friend who loves Job and wants what's good for him. So with that assumption in mind, what do we make of Eliphaz's tone in these? And I focused on these verses. So let's just take maybe a minute or two, let you read through them. I'll stop talking, and then we can hear your thoughts. 1 minute of silence when you're just pacing in the front feels like forever. It's like, oh, they've read the whole book of Job by now. So any thoughts here, at least from the opening? I picked the first couple of words and his last words to try and, as a mirror or window into his tone. What is Eliphaz's tone? Talia? Are these rhetorical questions? They're certainly rhetorical in the sense, even that's a great question, because how questions work in the book of Job is a fascinating study in itself. I mean, it's certainly rhetorical in the sense that I don't think he's expecting Job to answer right away. He doesn't need Job to answer. Yeah. It's fascinating, right? The friends' first words to Job are questions. And what is God's first words to Job? Questions. It's so many questions in the book of Job. Good. So it's a rhetorical question. So what does that tell us, Talia? What kind of tone are you picking up on Elefaz? Is this the rhetorical question like the mom asking, have you cleaned your room yet? It's like, I haven't cleaned my room. You're standing right here in the doorway. Like, obviously I haven't cleaned my room, rude. What are you feeling? What are you thinking when you say that it's a rhetorical question? How's that leading us? Encouragement. How so? Yeah, that's right. Okay. So Elefaz is, when you read just that first verse, you go, this could be the beginning of a good friendly conversation. Like Job has just poured out his heart. He's obviously in despair. And Elefaz starts off, dare I say, gently? Right? Like, hey, Job. Yeah, right. Do you mind if I talk with you here for a minute and say something? And then he even starts off with really positive things that Job has done. Listen, you've done a lot of good things. We're going to compare this later, Eliphaz's first words, with Eliphaz's last words to Job. By the end, Elefaz is singing a different tune about his friend Job, but he starts off and says, listen, you've done so much. You've instructed so many people. You've strengthened those with weak hands. You've supported those who've stumbled. Now, then this trouble comes on you and it's hard. Should not your piety be your confidence and your blameless ways your hope? So this is Job 4, verse 6. Should not your piety be your confidence and your blameless ways your hope? What is he saying there? Yeah, Rhonda. Say it again. Mm-hmm. Yes. Good. Okay, so let's look at those verses. So Rhonda is drawing our attention to Job 3, 25 and 26. What I feared, so this is Job talking, and Job is saying, what I feared has come upon me. What I dreaded has happened to me, just like Hebrew poetry, they kind of repeat the same idea. I have no peace, no quietness, no rest. I only have turmoil. So Rhonda's saying, so Job was fearing something. This is a window into Job. And Rhonda, is this a window into Job in which you are seeing faithfulness or faithlessness? Mm-hmm.
So it isn't like it's faith or faithlessness, it's the reality of his thoughts that he lived in internally. Yet he, by his words, it says he didn't curse God. He didn't sin with his words, but his internal life was extremely unsettled, unpeaceful. And now that all of this stuff happened to him on the outside, he finally opens it up and says, the things that I've been hearing, I want them to hear for so long, here they are.
Yeah. Yeah, so the text clearly is signaling that Job is, I like that word, unsettled. We certainly see an unsettled Job. An unsurprisingly unsettled Job, right? That in this process. In a...
Unsettled to how he lived his life externally. Because the friends come along and say, wait a minute, you did all this stuff. Why are you so turmoil internally?
Right. And there's a significant struggle and turmoil and even hesitation, those kinds of ideas. But, I always go back to Job 1 and 2. These are the words and actions of a faithful man. And I even find myself, even up here, right, thinking about Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. And I think it would be a fair description to say that Jesus is troubled, certainly, in Gethsemane. The gospel writers seem very clear to paint him in that way. And yet, faithful, even in the struggle. And it seems like with Elifaz, drawing on that language in 4:6 of piety, and what else does it say? Your blameless ways. Blameless. The same word that the narrator used to describe Job, the same word that God used to describe Job. Elifaz is talking truthfully here and saying, you're a blameless person. Your confidence should be in the fact that you are a righteous person. So that overall the question is, Eliphaz's tone at the beginning of this speech is one of a genuine friend. And Job is certainly someone who is struggling. I will argue throughout that he's struggling righteously and faithfully, even if humanly. But Elifaz starts off pretty nicely. But he does, if we were going to say, put true, false next to each of Eliphaz's claims, there's going to be some things we disagree with. Okay, so we'll keep moving along here. So let's look at Eliphaz's key verses, and these are the ones that I've put on your handout. 4:7, 4:17, and 5:8. These are considered the key verses by me. So, take them or leave them with a grain of salt. We're not going to look at every verse. So I had to pick some key ones to look at. So these are the key verses that really summarize Eliphaz's point. And so if you were going to look at these, so let's take a minute, maybe read through 1 or 2 or 3 of these verses. And if you were going to summarize Eliphaz's speech in one sentence, how would you do it? Or his main claim in one sentence, how would you do it? And, you'll just have to take my word for it that these are good representative verses for his view. This is just a side note. Chapter 5, verse 4, it says, so he's talking about the fool. He says, for the fool, his children are far from safety, crushed in court without a defender. Now, I have to recognize that there's evidence against reading Elifaz as a gentle friend, and this would be Exhibit A. What happened to Job's kids? They were crushed. So, this isn't the last time that Job's kids are going to be brought into the conversation, but it seems for Elifaz that he thought it was a useful rhetorical tool for some reason to bring them up almost as proof that Job's culpability and foolishness, because his children died, that makes Job the fool. So again, not great. Elifaz is not great. I'm not like Eliphaz's champion over here, like, go Elifaz, but I'm just, he starts off fairly gentle compared to where we'll end up. But any thoughts here? How would you summarize Eliphaz's point in one sentence, if you were going to paraphrase or summarize some of these ideas? Paul?
There's no one innocent. Not one.
There's no one innocent, not even one. So this is a very great summary of 4:17. Can a mortal be more righteous than God? Can even a strong man be more pure than his maker? Well, the answer obviously is no. Elifaz is asking, is anyone purely innocent and righteous? No. True or false? All humans are sinful. True. Elifaz is speaking true things to Job. That is going to be really interesting. So one of the things that's a ton of fun as we go through our study is for you to kind of keep a list and for you to say, okay, what are the craziest things that the friends say about God? And what's the craziest things that Job says about God? And then to compare those lists. We'll do a little bit of it in class, so I'm not going to tell you the answer. Okay, but overall, like it's fat. Go through, if you're able to take time during the week and you're looking through these dialogue cycles, ask yourself, all right, is what this friend is saying, what's the craziest thing in here that they say about God? What's the craziest thing that Job says about God? And make your list and write them down and look at it and compare it, because remember, at the end of this whole thing, God looks at the friends and says, you, friends, have not spoken rightly about me as my servant Job has. And Job is the one who expresses some kind of regret and repents in dust and ashes. So you're going, okay, all right, let's figure it out. All right, God's mad at the friends for what they've said about God, so let's find out what they say about God and where they go off track. God is happy with what Job says about God, so let's see what Job says about God and where he says the right things. And it's a lot of fun. I think it's fun. But I spent 6 years studying Job, so my idea of fun's a little skewed. So that's one way of summarizing Eliphaz's point. No one is innocent. What else? What's another way that you would summarize it? What's his point to Job? Yeah, Deb.
I'm not sure, but I think he's trying to encourage him in a way, like, I can see my friend. Like, you're not a bad person, even though that happened. Or, that's not like this. Kind of encourages him for getting on with this guy.
Yeah, that's right. And at the end of Eliphaz's speech, so so Deb's point is that these are kind of things that a friend would say, like, you've done good things. God is for you. At the end of Eliphaz's speech, he's very positive towards Job, right? It's not like, yeah, this is all that there is for you, Job, right? He says, you will be restored. You will know that your tent is secure. Things are gonna be okay for you because I know you're a righteous kind of dude. That's what Elifaz is basically saying. Good. So if I were summarizing it in one sentence, of course, I look at the book of Job as being about a lot of speech. And so I frame it in that way. I say, if Elifaz is talking to Job, he says, Job is wrong to protest his suffering because all humanity is fallen, that's Paul's point, and thus deserves some suffering. This is what Elifaz is basically saying. He's like, listen, Job, suffering is just part of what it means to be human. Because suffering is the response of being fallen. And because we're all fallen, we're all going to suffer. What has Elifaz said that we would look at and go, that's false? Nothing. Everything Elifaz says is true. We all sin. Because we sin, we're all owed a certain amount of suffering. Because God is just. I put that in parentheses because God's justice really takes a big importance later on in the book. And Elifaz doesn't talk a ton about it right now, but it's just sort of the foundation. God's justice is really the thing that's going to be put in view here and going to be debated over. So Elifaz tells Job, nobody's righteous, therefore we all deserve suffering. Let's see here. Who being innocent has ever perished? We all sin. Can a mortal be more righteous than God? Nope, nobody can. And he even says this, right? Verse 18 is really great, 4:18. If God places no trust in his servants, if he charges his angels with error, how much more those who live in houses of clay? He says, if the angels aren't even perfect, how much more us mere humans and us mere mortals? So we deserve a certain amount of suffering. Therefore, appeal to God. Okay, so questions about Elifaz right now. Yeah, Paul.
Well, it seems to me, the New Testament, of course, talks about us being sinful, all sinful creatures.
Yeah.
But the Old Testament, if you follow the 613 commandments, you should be free of sin, right?
So Paul's asking, if we follow the 613 commandments, are we free of sin? There is a... Are we free of sin? We're not free of sin. I would say the Old Testament teaches...
You're righteous if you do
We're-
follow the law. The law is what determines whether or not you're righteous. So you follow the law, you are okay. There is not something internally you have to deal with, as we know in the New Testament that Jesus died to correct for us. But in the Old Testament, there was no such thing. It wasn't it, if I'm wrong? Tell me, simply a matter of following the law, whatever the law was.
So Paul's question is there an idea of original sin, that we're all sinners in the Old Testament? And it seems very clearly the answer is yes, that it is taught. It's not nearly as clear as Paul teaches it, but we do have the ideas, right, of Adam and Eve, our parents, sinning, and death passing to all of their descendants because all have sinned, right? So Paul is bringing out the logic that the Old Testament was already teaching us. So I think when we're looking at the Old Testament, in Psalm 51, right, in sin did my mother conceive me, those kinds of ideas. Over and over again in the Old Testament, we're seeing even the righteous people fail and be sinners. That is teaching us that we're all sinners, and Paul just goes and spells it out for us. But I would say that the Old Testament clearly teaches it, and in some sense assumes it. And even Job, there's going to be times where Job says, I'm not saying I'm innocent, I'm just saying I haven't done anything to deserve all this. Any questions about Elifaz and kind of where we're going? This is kind of the encouragement moment. Stick with Job. Keep wrestling with these guys. Keep asking yourself, what are they saying? What's similar? What's different? Why does it matter? This is the hardest part of the book of Job, are these chapters, these dialogue cycles. Because then we got to go through them, right? And then we're going to see what Job says. No, we're not going to do this for all of them, but I want to focus on the first speech for each of these friends especially, so we can kind of see where they're similar and different. So we're going to look at, so in other words, take your lumps and learn from them. That's kind of Eliphaz's colloquial wisdom. Okay, so then we're going to look at Job's response real quick. Real quick? Yeah, real quick. So Job responds, Oh, we forgot this question. Who is Eliphaza talking to? This is easy. Job. Who is he not talking to? God. He never once talks to God. He always talks to Job. So Job starts off in chapter 6. And who is Job talking to in chapter 6? Elifaz. Then Job replied. So he's talking first to Elifaz. And then he gives all these words. But we can see verses 6, 8 through 10 are kind of the summary words. Oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant what I hope for, that God would be willing to crush me. Again, he's wanting death. To let loose his hand and cut off my life. Then I would still have this consolation, my joy in unrelenting pain, that I had not denied the words of the Holy One. So Job wants to die. Chapter 3, he wants to die because his suffering would be over. But in chapter 6, he kind of changes it a little bit. What's he saying here? Why does he want to die? Or at least what would his comfort in death be? That he didn't curse God. That even, he's like, I just want this test to be done because I'm passing right now, and if it ends, then I passed. I'm done. I haven't denied the words of the Holy One. Again, words, speech, it's so fascinating the way the author writes this book, right? He could have said, I wouldn't deny the truths of the Holy One. I wouldn't deny the character of the Holy One, but I wouldn't deny the words of the Holy One. Words, speech, talking, cursing, blessing. These are the matrix of ideas that the book of Job is revolving around. And these are the ideas that Job is holding faithful to, that he would not deny the. So Job remains faithful. Job remains faithful. We're going to have to pick up here, but before we do that, I want to skip a little bit, just a little. All right, so far, what's one thing that you've learned about reading the Bible so far through this class? How has this been helpful? You're like, you know what, I don't think this is kind of a new way of doing something, or this is something I've been reminded of. What's something about reading the Bible that's been helpful so far in this class? The repetitions. Good. The way that they're similar, the way that they're different. Good. Any others? You're like, I got all this. I could have done this. Yeah, Jeff. Who's being the therapist? Elefaz? Yeah, that's good. He brings up the elephants in the room. Yeah, that's a helpful way of remembering what he does. He definitely brings out some elephants. Good. Joy? Yeah, what we say matters. I think that's really going to be an underdeveloped lesson from Job that we'll expect because I've hit it so much. But a lot of people miss the speech matters. And the way we talk about God and to God, and the way we talk to our friends about God matters. Good. Okay, so what's one thing that you've learned about the book of Job so far? What's one thing that you've kind of learned over the last couple of weeks that you're like, yep, this is something that's going to stick with me for, at least 4 days? The words and speech mattering. Good. God is in control. Yeah. One of the things that's hard with Job, I've thought about this, right? I don't know how to preach the book of Job because of these dialogue cycles. It's a hard book to preach, right? Like what I'm basically asking you to do is I keep saying, trust me, it's going to be worth it. Come back. By the time we get to 42, it'll be really, really good. You can't do that for a sermon, right? You can't be like, all right, we're going to do for the next 14 weeks through the book of Job, and we're going to slog through these friends. But trust me, by Christmas, you'll really be glad you're going here. It's a really hard book to teach, but one that I hope along the way we can kind of bring out some nuggets of little things. But this is the rough going, but it makes such a big difference to understand how and why the author shapes it this way. The author could have written Job with just 3 speeches. He chose to do the cycles. And we're going to have to keep asking, why? Why? 23 chapters of cycles? That's our big question.